What's up, guys? This is Mr. Teen Tutor, and in this video we're going to be discussing the unit circle and trigonometric ratios. You can think of this video as a little bit of an introduction to trigonometry. As you can see here, you're seeing pies now, so you're probably wondering what in the world these are. But when you start learning about trigonometry, one of the things that you should understand is that we don't use degrees that much anymore. Now, of course, you know that trigonometry is obviously the study of triangles and goes beyond that. And you know that we use degrees to express angles of triangles and such. But trigonometry does not only deal with right triangles and things like that, it also deals with other complex things, as you can see right here. And we're going to not continue actually, we are going to discuss now a new concept that you need to keep in mind. What I want you guys to do is imagine a circle. And it doesn't matter what the radius is or any of that. Just imagine a circle. Now take that radius and put that radius on the circumference. It's on the circumference, then take that radius and continue putting it around the circumference until the circumference has been filled with radii. One of the things you should notice from there is that it takes 3.14 radii to complete 180 degrees, and that it takes 3.14 more radii, or 6.2i radii overall, to complete 360 degrees. So, based on that concept, and it should work with any circle. If it doesn't, then you probably messed up. You should realize then that pi is going to be equal to 180 degrees, and then 2 pi is equal to 360 degrees. Folks, if it's one thing that I should really emphasize in this video, it's that you must remember this concept right here. If you can't remember this concept, then you're going to have trouble with trigonometry. Now, this should obviously be a concept that isn't too hard to understand, but what you have to realize is you have to put this now in radians rather than degrees. You have to move away from degrees and go to this. It may sound freaky at first, but over time you'll become used to this and it'll become much easier. Now, this is called a unit circle, and you're probably wondering what it is. Well, a unit circle is just a circle with a radius of 1 and its center being at the origin, as you can see right there. So if I tell you that, and we look right here, this is 0, 2 pi, or 0 degrees, 360 degrees, the coordinates would be, you guessed it, 1, 0. Now let's look at these other ones right here. Pi over 6, if you want to, let's quickly go over what it is in degrees. In degrees, that would be 30 degrees, because it's pi, which is 180 over 6. So then this would be 45 degrees, pi over 4, and then pi over 3 would be 60 degrees. So if you want to remember that, that's fine, but what you have to understand is from now on, you have to think of it in radians, unless the teacher on a test or quiz wants it in degrees. But still, nevertheless, you should focus on radians and make sure you learn them well. Now for each of these angles right here, there are coordinate measures, and I'm not going to go over how they're derived. How they're derived, it makes sense, but just for the purpose of understanding these coordinates, I'm just going to write down for you what the coordinates are. And bear with me, they may look weird, but understand that these are the coordinates that represent each of these radian angles. So this, for pi over 6, is root 3 over 2, comma 1/2. That's that. Pi over 4 is one of the easy ones to remember because, let me get this out of the way so that you have more room to see the coordinates. As I was saying, pi over 4 is an easy coordinate to remember because it's this. Root 2 over 2, comma root 2 over 2. Those aren't hard to remember. For pi over 3, you just simply switch these two. So you have 1/2, comma root 3 over 2. So now we go here, pi over 2. So what do you think the coordinates are there. You guessed it. It is 0, 1, and at that point it is 90 degrees. That's 0, 1. Yeah, that was a bad parentheses right there. Now 2 pi over 3. It's the same coordinates as this, but there's something you have to keep in mind. We are now in the second quadrant. This is why you also have to remember, keep in mind which quadrants you're in, because certain values are going to be negative. Because we're in the second quadrant, x values are negative. So in this quadrant, it's negative 1/2, comma, positive root 3 over 2. So the y value still stays positive. And for 3 pi over 4, it would be negative root 2 over 2, comma, root 2 over 2. And then for 5, this is, I apologize for you guys being unable to read this, but negative root 2 over 2, comma, root 2 over 2 pairs with 3 pi over 4, and then this coordinate pairs with 2 pi over 3. And then going on, 5 pi over 6 would be negative root 3 over 2, comma, 1/2. And oh, I forgot to add it here. Then we have pi. Pi is that coordinate right there. And the coordinates at that point are, you guessed it, negative 1, 0. Now, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 0, 2 pi are called quadrantal angles. As you can see, they're either angles that are horizontal or vertical with respect to this unit circle. Now we go into the third quadrant. As we move from quadrant, you have to keep in mind which values, meaning x and y, are going to be negative, and which ones are going to be positive. So for 7 pi over 6, we're in the third quadrant, which means both x and y are going to be negative. And you should realize that with each of these angles, the coordinate stays the same, the sign just changes. So we now have negative root 3 over 2, comma, negative 1/2. And then for 5 pi over 4, we have negative root 2 over 2, comma, negative root 2 over 2. Again, I apologize for kind of the messy handwriting here. I know it's maybe a little tough for you to guess, but I'm trying to show you guys as best as possible where these coordinates are. And then for 4 pi over 3, I'll bring it down here. We have negative 1/2, and then negative root 3 over 2. And then lastly, at 3 pi over 2, we have 0, comma, negative 1. Again, that's a quadrantal angle. And now we move into the fourth quadrant. So what's going to be positive and what's going to be negative? So x values are going to be, you guessed it, positive, and y values are still going to be negative. So for 5 pi over 3, we have 1/2, comma, negative root 3 over 2. Alright, that one may be tough to read for you guys. Negative root 3 over 2. 7 pi over 4 is going to be positive root 2 over 2, comma, negative root 2 over 2. And then lastly, pi over 6, I'll bring that down here. For pi over 6, we have root 3 over 2, comma, negative 1/2. So there you go. Those are your coordinates. Root 3 over 2, comma, 1/2, root 2 over 2, comma, root 2 over 2, half, comma, root 3 over 2, and then of course the coordinates are the same, but then the sign changes depending on which quadrant you're on. Even though you may not be able to read the coordinates right here, these should be kind of easy to read. So based off of these general coordinates in the first quadrant, you should be able then to determine what the coordinates are here in this quadrant, and that quadrant. And also keeping in mind the quadrantal angles, because those are of course very important. So this is the unit circle again, and these are the coordinates, and you need to memorize these coordinates, because now you'll probably be asked by your teacher to provide the trig ratios for each of these coordinates. Now you're probably wondering what these trig ratios are. Well, if we come to this board, I'm pretty sure you're familiar with sine, cosine, tangent. Those are trig ratios, but now we're going to add an extra 3. I know that sucks, guys. We're adding an extra 3 trig ratios now, but they're not so hard to get. As you can see, sine of an angle is equal to 1 over cosecant of an angle. Cosine inverse is equal to 1 over secant of an angle. Tangent of an angle is equal to 1 over cotangent of an angle, which is of course equal to sine of the angle over the cosine of the angle. And likewise, I didn't write it, but cosecant of the angle is 1 over sine, secant is 1 over cosine, and then cotangent is 1 over tangent. So they're both inverses of each other. There you go. That's the key word to keep in mind. I'll write it here. Inverses. For each of these trig ratios, cotangent's an inverse of tangent, secant's an inverse of cosine, and cosecant's an inverse of sine. Keep that in mind, and it shouldn't be too hard. Now, in a test or quiz, you may be asked to find certain trig ratios of an angle. So we're going to pick an angle here. We'll start off easy, but then I'll provide harder examples. We'll start with pi. So when a teacher says find the 6 trig ratios, they mean find the sine of that angle, so sine of pi, find the cosine of pi, find the tan of pi, and find the cosecant of pi, find the secant of pi, and then lastly find the cotangent of pi. Now it may seem daunting at first because you have to find these 6 things, but when you know the coordinates, again, I'm asking you guys to memorize it. When you know the coordinates, this stuff is not hard. Now, here's another concept to keep in mind. For any coordinate you have, x, comma, y here in trig and with regards to the unit circle, the x coordinate is always going to be the cosine of that angle. The y coordinate is always going to be the sine of that angle. That's another concept to keep in mind, so that will help you. So like for an example, let me switch markers here. You're probably bored with black by now. So sine of pi, now like I said, the sine of pi corresponds to the y coordinate of the angle. So what's the sine of pi? You guessed it, it's 0. What's the cosine? Let's look at the x value, it's -1. Now tangent. Tangent, as we know, is sine over cosine. So you take 0 over -1, which is 0. And then cosecant, remember, that's equal to 1 over sine. I didn't write that, but like I said, they're inverses of each other. Now 1 over 0, you can't do that. So that's undefined. So your teachers are probably going to accept this, but I like to write this as u. U standing for undefined. Secant, that's 1 over cosine. So 1 over -1 is still -1. And then cotangent is 1 over tangent, again 1 over 0, that's undefined, so I like to write that as u. So there you go. You just outlined the 6, you just got the 6 trig ratios, not trade, trig ratios for this coordinate. Now of course pi, as I said earlier, the coordinate was easy, -1, comma 0. But if you look at these other coordinates right here, you're going to have to do a little bit more math in terms of deriving some of the trig functions, such as rationalizing the denominator, etc. So I hope this video has helped you. I hope you have understood a little bit of how trig works and how you need to memorize the coordinates of this, and you need to memorize these concepts right here, and you should be able to find the 6 trig functions of any angle in this. And in my next video, we'll go over some more examples of that. Thank you.